Now moving on to introduce John. John Hatcher, someone I've known for really quite a long time, actually. He's gotten a BA and an MA from Vanderbilt University and a Ph.D. from the University of Georgia. He's been a professor at the University of South Florida in Tampa for quite a long time. He's now an emeritus there. He was the director of graduate studies there in English and specialized in teaching medieval literature and creative writing. I remember well, John, in 2000, when we were both at a Baha'i Studies conference at Oxford. Before you began your talk, I believe you recited Chaucer, because after all, Chaucer may very well have been there and recited the same thing in that particular building, which was an extremely old building, if I recall right. So I was very impressed by that. He's taught literature for 43 years, 39 of which was at the University of South Florida, has published some 30 books and many, many articles, chapters, and poems. He was the editor of the Journal of Bahá'í Studies until a few years ago, and now he offers Zoom classes to people on various topics. They've been going through the Agon lately, if I recall correctly. So today, John will be presenting about Abdu'l-Bahá as architect of the world order of Baha'u'lláh. And John, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to this webinar, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate it, and welcome everyone. The Zoom classes he's talking about is a series that's been going on for over a year now, and all of the classes are recorded. It's a study of the sequence of the Abrahamic religions. We are now up to the Baha'i faith and are, insofar as studying the life of Baha'u'lláh and his revelation, we're up to the end of the Baghdad period, and we'll be studying the Tablet of the Holy Mariner next Wednesday. These are recorded and on YouTube channel, Courses on the Baha'i Faith by John Hatcher, or they're also on my website, which is johnshatcher.com. As Rob said, what I want to try to emphasize is something that you may be aware of, and you're certainly aware of it if you've studied Book 8 in the Rui Institute series, and that is the amazing contribution that Abdu'l-Bahá made to the formation of the world order of Baha'u'lláh. Now, normally when we think of the blueprint for the world order of Baha'u'lláh, we think of the Agdas, and that essentially the whole framework is from the mind of Baha'u'lláh, which of course essentially it is. But without the steps and measures and institutions that were created and implemented and refined by Abdu'l-Bahá, we would not have the world order that we have today. In fact, I think it would be accurate to say it could not have succeeded without Abdu'l-Bahá. That we can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. So let me share my screen and start with a PowerPoint, which will go over the 7 particular institutions or decisions that Abdu'l-Bahá took that created or helped to fashion and fill out the missing parts of the world order of Baha'u'lláh. And so I've titled this talk, Abdu'l-Bahá as Architect, because he did indeed design, as we will see in these 7 particular parts of the world order, the essential institutions, but more importantly, perhaps, the powers, capacities, and obligations of these institutions, as well as how they would be appointed or elected. So let us begin by just reviewing quickly some of the titles that Baha'u'lláh himself bestowed on his beloved son, because he knew full well, doubtless, that Abdu'l-Bahá was his successor from the beginning. You might remember, for example, that it was Abdu'l-Bahá who actually was one of his secretaries and was the first to recognize Baha'u'lláh. So he was titled the Master, the Mystery of God, the Perfect Exemplar, the Sacred and Glorious Being, this branch of holiness, the limb of the law of God, the gulf that hath branched out of this ocean, the one round whom all names revolve, the most mighty branch of God, his ancient and immutable mystery, the apple of mine eye, a shield unto all who are in heaven and on earth, and a shelter for all mankind. A stronghold for whosoever hath believed in God. These are just the titles bestowed by Baha'u'lláh. And Mishkan Kalam, that was his title he assumed, which means the musk-scented pen, created this calligraphic design, which includes these titles that were bestowed on Abdu'l-Bahá. So what were some of the titles, functions, and duties of Abdu'l-Bahá? He was, of course, the perfect exemplar. So we look to him for a pattern of comportment, a way of interacting with other people. He was the instigator of teaching plans. That's one of the 7 things we'll look at. He was designated as the infallible interpreter of the holy texts. So you have from Baha'u'lláh the designation of Abdu'l-Bahá as an infallible interpreter, and of course Abdu'l-Bahá designates the guardian as infallible interpreter, whereas the House of Justice is designated as the elucidator of the text. A subtle distinction, but a distinction all the same. The successor and head of the faith, the source of guidance for all questions pertaining to the faith, the source of guidance for spiritual assemblies. Now, this is something you may not recall off the top of your head, but the fact is that a great deal of the guidance we have for spiritual assemblies are quotes from, or passages from Abdu'l-Bahá, who wrote to the assemblies constantly, explaining to them how to consult, how to elect officers, and how to operate in general. And then finally, of course, the title for this talk, the architect of the world order. So let's see how that occurs. What were his contributions? This is a letter on behalf of the House of Justice written in 1992. In many ways, the will of the master completes and supplements the Agdas. Now, maybe you didn't know that, but that's an important thing to know. In it, Abdu'l-Bahá lays down in considerable detail the manner of election and function of the International House of Justice, its powers and jurisdiction. He also fills in a remarkable gap in that mighty book of laws, and one which any intelligent commentator on that document must be immediately struck by. And some of those we will get into, some of those we will not. So, for example, the idea of monogamy is something we attribute to the interpretation of Abdu'l-Bahá. So he clarified some of the laws, he implemented some. So what were the institutions of the world order that were either created or delineated or refined by Abdu'l-Bahá? Well, we're going to look at 7 of them. The first is the creation and guidance for the operation of the local spiritual assemblies. The second, of course, very importantly, was the guardianship, which he both created and instigated at his death by appointing Shoghi Effendi and defining that institution, as we will see. Third, the secondary houses of justice, what we presently call the national houses of justice. This was a very important strategic move that put a stop to those who thought when Abdu'l-Bahá died, there should be an immediate election of the Universal House of Justice for reasons that we will see. The Universal House of Justice, now he didn't create it, of course, Baha'u'lláh did, but he created the means by which it would be elected, who the electorate would be, and he created the parameters of their authority. The institution of the hands of cause. Now, there were hands of cause appointed by Baha'u'lláh, but the institution did not exist. So how the hands of the cause would henceforth be appointed, what authority they would have, what function they would have. And finally, the teaching plans, of course, from which derived the plans of the Guardian and now the House of Justice, are all under the umbrella of the tablets of the Divine Plan. And finally, the concept of the twin institutions, the interaction between the learned and the rulers, a concept which is mentioned by Baha'u'lláh, but explained in detail by Abdu'l-Bahá. So let's see how these work. First of all, the local spiritual assemblies. He described the meeting of the 19-day feast. He didn't create the 19-day feast, which was inaugurated by the Bab and ratified by Baha'u'lláh in the Aqdas. But the 19-day feast has been described by the Guardian as the foundation of the world order of Baha'u'lláh. And if you may remember, Abdu'l-Bahá, in addition to all the other things he says about how it should be conducted, he talks about it as the Lord's Supper for the local community, which puts it sort of in rank with the most sacred communion in Christianity. The guidance on consultation, the guidance on the duties of the LSA, insofar as its principal duty being teaching the cause, the guidance on the election process, which is in his will and testament, how the LSA would be elected. In fact, how all the institutions would be elected is made plain in the will and testament. The guardianship. Of course, this was the most astounding thing because this was not anticipated by anyone, not even Shoghi Effendi himself. And this is made clear by both the Guardian indirectly as he talked to Leroy Aois and others near to him at the World Center, but in particular, it's talked about by Ruhiya Khanum in the Priceless Pearl, the book she wrote on the Guardian. So the guardianship is anticipated in the Aqdas. Now, what does that mean? It means that there is, well, we'll get to that when we get to some of the other things, but suffice it to say, there is a, you probably often heard that term, that it is anticipated in the Kitabi Aqdas, but where is it indicated? We'll get to that. The appointment, so he appointed the first guardian himself, Shoghi Effendi. He described the powers, the authority, and the means of succession. So this is the statement by Ruhiya Khanum in the Priceless Pearl. After the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá, which Shoghi Effendi and the Baha'is expected, according to Ruhiya Khanum in the Priceless Pearl, Shoghi Effendi had no foreknowledge of the existence of the institution of the guardianship, least of all that he was appointed as guardian. That the most he had expected was that perhaps because he was the eldest grandson, Abdu'l-Bahá might have left instructions as to how the Universal House of Justice was to be elected, what most of the Baha'is then expected to happen. And because you had local assemblies in many different countries. And so these local assemblies would be the electorate, or all the Baha'is would be the electorate. And he might have been designated the one to see these were carried out and might act as convener of the gathering which would elect it. All right. So that's very important to know, that he had no prior knowledge that there would be such an institution, let alone that it would be his. And at the age of 24, you can imagine what weight that was on him, not only to know that the faith which he served flawlessly and with all of his, every ounce of his energy, was now in his hands. In other words, the revelation from God destined to unite the whole world was now the responsibility of a 24-year-old young man, Imagine that if you can. What Shoghi Effendi discovered, however, when he read the will in the home of Abdu'l-Bahá on January the 3rd, 1922, was the following. And this is from the Will and Testament. "O my loving friends, after the passing away of this wronged one, it is incumbent upon the agsan, the branches, the afnan, the twigs, of the sacred lote tree, the hands or pillars of the cause of God, and the loved ones of the Abha beauty to turn unto Shoghi Effendi, the youthful branch branched from two hallowed and sacred lote trees, and the fruit grown from the union of the two offshoots of the tree of holiness, as he is the sign of God, the chosen branch, the guardian of the cause of God, he unto whom all the agsan, the afnan, the hands of the cause of God and his loved ones must turn." So that's unmistakably clear, but it's not clear what the guardian's duties are at this point. For that, we go to something else. Rob, I think you need to mute yourself. The authority. What authority did the guardian have? For he is, after Abdu'l-Bahá, the guardian of the cause. The afnan, the hands of the cause, and the beloved must obey him and turn to him. He that obeyeth him not hath not obeyed God. He that turneth away from him hath turned away from God. And he that denieth him hath denied the true one. That's pretty powerful. And so it puts it very succinctly. Abdu'l-Bahá states that the guardian has total authority, and that if you disobey what the guardian ordained you to do, which of course many did, but particularly his own family, then you are disobeying God himself. Secondly, he had the authority to, as the infallible interpreter of the text. And this is the Abdu'l-Bahā's statement about that particular aspect of his authority. He is the expounder of the words of God, and after him will succeed the firstborn of his lineal descendants. He is to be the president of the Universal House of Justice. The guardian of the cause is its sacred head and its distinguished member for life of that body. Now, this did not mean that that he would have any more authority than any of the other members. It simply meant that he would, as with other institutions, be the convener and the one who would direct the consultation. So as a result of the fact that there is no guardian now, there is a guardianship. The institution exists very powerfully and importantly. But because there is no physical guardian, the House of Justice does not have a president, and the job of carrying on that function as they meet, it rotates among the members. Secondly, how does this body of the guardianship, or this institution of the guardianship, embody the twin institutions of the rulers and the learned? And here is, again, Bahá'u'lláh in the book of his covenant. It is incumbent upon, and of course, that's the Kitabi-Ad, one of the important books of the covenant, is incumbent upon everyone to aid those day springs of authority and sources of command who are adorned with the ornament of equity and justice. Blessed are the rulers and the learned among the people of Baha. They are my trustees among my servants and the manifestations of my commandments amidst my people. Now, what this is getting at, as we'll soon see, is the fact that the guardian serves on the one hand as the head of the institution of the learned, because it is his interpretation of the writings that is authoritative and infallible. On the other hand, he also functions as president of the House of Justice, though in that position, as I said, he has no more authority than do the others. So it is the institution of the House of Justice that is the head of the rulers, as it were, the executive body. During his lifetime, he is director of the cause or executor. He is the source of learning, infallible understanding of the text. Now we get to succession of the guardianship. This becomes very important. The firstborn is of the guardian is the most likely choice, though not certain, because there's certain qualifications that must abide before that becomes true. And of course, the guardian having no children, and because this was to be the firstborn male heir, there was no way for him to appoint the first of his lineal descendants. But look at the criteria that are espoused by Abdu'l-Bahá in this passage. O ye beloved of the Lord, it is incumbent upon the guardian of the cause of God to appoint in his own lifetime him that shall become his successor, that differences may not arise after his passing. He that it is appointed must manifest in himself detachment from all worldly things, must be the essence of purity, must show in himself the fear of God, knowledge, wisdom, and learning. Well, that sounds very good, but how are these qualities to be assessed? Well, of course, first you would presume that the guardian, if his firstborn did not bear these qualities, then he could appoint another of his lineal descendants. This was his authority. But as you will see later, this was also to be ascertained by the hands of the cause. Thus, another branch here, not a branch of the administrative order, but another descendant of Abdu'l-Baha, Bahá'u'lláh. Thus, should the firstborn of the guardian of the cause of God not manifest in himself the truth of the words, the child is the secret essence of its sire. That is, should he not inherit the spiritual within him, within the guardian of the cause of God, and his glorious lineage not be matched with a goodly character, then must he, the guardian of the cause, choose another branch to succeed him. But there are checks and balances throughout this, Abdu'l-Bahā's construction of the world order. And so you have the institution of the hands of the cause, which we haven't described yet. But it is described here by necessity because this individual, even though selected by the guardian and presumably assessed by the guardian, must be approved of by the 9-membered body of the hands of the cause. See below. Now, see below because, excuse me, let me have a sip of tea here. The election of these 9 must be carried out either unanimously or by majority from the company of the hands of the cause. In other words, the institution of the hands of the cause consists of all the hands of the cause, but they themselves create an institution within themselves, the 9-membered body, which becomes critically important after the passing of the guardian. They become what are called the custodians of the faith. And so they elect a 9-membered body, which, whether unanimously or by a majority vote, must give their assent to the choice of the one whom the guardian of the cause hath chosen as his successor. This assent must be given in such wise as the assenting and dissenting voices may not be distinguished. And what does that mean? It means secret ballot. And so you see here the one instance in the guidance of Abdu'l-Bahá where he's not only saying what elections should be held and how they should be held, majority vote, secret ballot. And of course, when you get to the institutions, plurality vote, as we will see. So the next institution created by Abdu'l-Bahá, and this is, I wouldn't say of equal importance as the appointment of the guardian, but possibly so in this sense. You will see as we go through his creation of the secondary houses of justice or national assemblies, that they are the electorate of the house. But there were no national spiritual assemblies. There were only local spiritual assemblies or territorial spiritual assemblies. There was no specific designation of assemblies as being national spiritual assemblies. And since these were the electorate, those that were chosen to elect the House of Justice, they had to be created, which meant not only did you now have a guardian, but you now had the guardian faced with the obligation of leading the Baha'i community worldwide to create this electorate so you could eventually have a universal House of Justice. Now you see why the election of the House of Justice or the creation of the House of Justice had to be delayed, because you wanted a representative body of electorate, which means you needed national assemblies that represented the Baha'i community worldwide. And this is the statement by Abdu'l-Bahá creating this institution, still from his will and testament. In all countries, a secondary House of Justice must be instituted, and these secondary houses of justice must elect the members of the universal one. So he's done two things there: creating the House of Justice for the secondary houses of justice, and designating them as the electorate of the House of Justice. Their part in the three-tiered election of the House of Justice, for they are the pillars, goes like this. Now let me take another sip of tea. How is this three-tiered? Because you've got the local assemblies, you've got now, of course, you have regional councils, you've got national assemblies, you've got the Universal House of Justice. So how does the three tiers work? Well, it's not from the LSA to the NSA to the House of Justice. It's every individual Baha'i in the world is participating in this universal suffrage. In other words, every individual Baha'i helps elect the House of Justice, has a part in it. So no one is left out. So the individuals in a community are in, of course, we've got electoral districts in the United States, and you have similar divisions within every country, elect delegates to the National Assembly, or to the National Convention. So that's the first tier. You elect the delegate. The delegates collectively elect the National Spiritual Assembly. That's your second tier. And then the National Assemblies every 5 years elect the Universal House of Justice. That's your third tier. So while the local assembly, which already existed, has the responsibility for governance of the local community and carrying out all the necessary governmental functions of that community, it is the individual who is the first tier of the electoral process for the House of Justice. Consultation and decision-making is patterned after his guidance to the local assembly, that is for the national assemblies. So you'll find that the articles of incorporation and operation of the local assemblies is patterned after the creation of that same document and that same guidance that was created with the articles of incorporation of the national spiritual assemblies. Fourth, the House of Justice. Now, again, Abdu'l-Bahá did not create the Universal House of Justice. This was something that Bahá'u'lláh ordained that would be the ultimate guidance for the Baha'i community and ultimately for the world at large. What did Abdu'l-Bahá contribute to this institution? Well, we've already seen that he designed how it would be established. It would be established through that three-tiered electoral process. Its structure, we're going to get to that in just a second. How did he structure it? What is its authority? He describes that in detail. Its infallibility, he describes that in detail. its succession. He describes that in detail. So let's look at those. The establishment, of course, we've already said that. It will be universally elected and established, and we've described what that means. Well, the structure, of course, the idea of it being nine-membered can be changed, but this was designated. But it was the men of the House of Justice. Was interpreted by Abdu'l-Bahá to mean literally that it was to be confined to males. Now, I'm not sure that was Abdu'l-Bahá or was that Shoghi Effendi, but I believe it was Abdu'l-Bahá, that this meant that it was literally to be confined to males, something we can discuss at some point. Why no chair or head? Again, because the guardian was to be the president, and since there is no physical guardian, it says, should he not attend in person its deliberation, he must appoint one to represent him, and that's why the chair of the House of Justice rotates. The members are elected to a 5-year term. And what authority do they have? Well, here again, the infallibility is a crucial point, and this has been challenged up throughout the history of the faith from this point up until the present day. I say challenged, I don't mean successfully or that by any authoritative source, but there are those who said their infallibility is confined to legislative matters. In other words, when they create a law, where it's clear in the writings of Abdu'l-Bahá and elsewhere that their infallibility has to do with whatsoever they decide. And you'll see this in just a second. Unto the most holy book everyone must turn, and all that is not expressly recorded therein must be referred to the universal house of justice. That is verily the truth and the purpose of God himself. Whosoever doth deviate therefrom is verily of them that love discord, hath shown forth malice and turned away from the Lord of the covenant. But it goes on. It is incumbent upon these members of the House of Justice to gather in a certain place and deliberate upon all problems which have caused difference, questions that are obscure, and matters that are not expressly recorded in the book meaning the works of Bahá'u'lláh. Whatsoever they decide has the same effect as the text itself. That's very clear. In other words, their authority has the same power and infallibility and power as anything that is in the writings of Bahá'u'lláh or in the guidance of Abdu'l-Bahá. And now, and this confirms it even more soundly or more adamantly. And now concerning the House of Justice, and again, these are quotes from the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá, which God hath ordained as the source of all good and freed from all error. It must be elected by universal suffrage, that is, by the believers. But what I've outlined here, or highlighted here rather, is the fact that the infallibility covers everything they decide, not simply legislative decisions. For one reason, you cannot really make a clean distinction between what is legislative when you're talking about the rulers and what is not. Everything has some legislative effect that comes from them. Because it has the same authority as the text, believers can't pick and choose any more than they can with the laws and guidance of Bahá'u'lláh. That's my own writing, not by Abdu'l-Bahá, but it's my way of saying what I've observed over the years is that some believers would, who have questioned this. And I don't mean to imply that the infallibility has been a point of controversy. It is not, but it's simply been reclarified by various texts and guidance from the House and from the Guardian over the years. And then succession, again, the three-tiered election, we've already done that. Now we come to the fifth institution, the hands of the cause. What is their responsibility? How are they appointed? What is their authority? What is their function? How are they succeeded? How do you get new hands of the cause? Well, they're appointed by the guardian. And that's the only person that can appoint them. So when the guardian deceased, there could be no more hands of the cause. This is an important fact to know about the history of the Baha'i administrative order and how it evolved. O friends, and this is from the Will and Testament, the hands of the cause must be nominated and appointed by the guardian of the cause of God. All must be under his shadow and obey his command. Should any within or without the company of the hands of cause disobey and seek division, the wrath of God and his vengeance will be upon him, for he will have caused a breach in the true faith of God. And then he'll go on to say that they should cast out anyone who does that. And of course, this occurred in 1961 with Mason Remy, who was a hand of the cause, who declared himself the second guardian. He was very elderly at the time, and they tried to beseech him to stop making such a clearly fallacious claim, since the guardian had not appointed him, nor did he comply with any of the other requisites to be the guardian of the cause. But he did not, and he was indeed declared what is called a covenant breaker, which means that he was effectively banned from having any functioning in the Baha'i faith. But it has more definition of covenant breaker than that, which we can get to during the Q&A if you're interested. The dual functions. They had two functions, teaching and protection. So let's get to the teaching first. This body of the hands of the cause is under the direction of the guardian of the cause of God. He must continually urge them to strive and endeavor to the utmost of their ability to diffuse the sweet savors of God and to guide all the peoples of the world. For it is in the light of the divine guidance that causeth all the universe to be illumined. So that's their first job. Their second is to protect the cause. My object is to show that the hands of the cause of God must be ever watchful, and so soon as they find anyone beginning to oppose and protest against the guardian of the cause of God, cast him out from the congregation of the people of Baha, and in no wise accept any excuse from him. Now, that may sound very cut and dry. It is not, and we can discuss that in the Q&A if you want, the process. They are the custodians later on, and that is after the guardian deceases, without leaving a will appointing a successor, which he cannot because he had no children, nor were there any branches that qualified, because all of the eligible branches of the cause had become covenant breakers, had rejected the guardian. So what happened was this is where we've already seen this previously in the standards for appointing a new guardian, that they must elect from among their own number 9 persons that shall at all times be occupied in the important services in the work of the guardian of the cause. The election of these 9 must be carried out either unanimously or by majority vote. So we've already gone over this passage, but suffice to say, now it becomes important in 1957 when the guardian deceases. So who guides the cause? Well, fortunately, he had a month before he deceased, in November of 1957, he had in October written a letter appointing the hands of the cause to have the power or authority to guide the cause, and the institution of the hands of the cause then elected the 9 members who were called the custodians of the cause. So what is the succession? Only the guardian can appoint hands, as we've already said, and therefore when he deceased, there could be no more hands. Thus, the Continental Board of Counselors was created to carry out their dual functions. In other words, you need an institution on the learned to carry out the function that the hands had as the learned in guiding the teaching and in protecting the cause. And so before all the hands had passed, the Continental Board of Counselors were created to carry out their functions. Now, we can get very detailed in that, but let's do that later if you wish to get into it, because you have first, before the Continental Boards of Counselors was created, the hands of the cause themselves had auxiliary board members that they chose to help them. And some of them were chosen to be assistants in guiding the teaching in a particular area, and some were chosen to serve as auxiliary board members for protection in a particular area. And I say a particular area because the hands had their own area of service. So you might have hands that were appointed to serve in Africa, hands that were appointed to serve in North America, and so on. And so they would have these ancillary positions serving them, the auxiliary board members. But once you had the hands of the cause no longer sufficient in number to carry out this, the Continental Board of Counselors was created so that each continent had counselors, and the serving under the counselors were these same auxiliary board members who would have these two functions. So we're about through the teaching plans, which is the tablet of the divine plan. The tablets of the divine plan consists of 14 tablets revealed by, and that's said twice there, that's a mistake, Abdu'l-Bahá during the First World War, addressed to the Baha'is in North America and received by them in 1919, which Shoghi Effendi has called the Mandate and the Supreme Charter for Teaching. And of course, he followed later himself, once there was enough organization in the faith for teaching plans. He created the first teaching plan himself in 1937. So we had a 7-year plan and then another 7-year plan. And then you had the 10-year World Crusade, which were created by the Guardian under the umbrella, again, of the Tablets of the Divine Plan, even as the teaching plans of the House of Justice are also under that umbrella, as we'll see in a second. In all, Abdu'l-Bahá mentioned some 120 territories and islands to which the message of Bahá'u'lláh was to be carried. That is in these documents. An immediate response to the tablets was made by a few inspired individuals, such as Martha Root and Mr. and Mrs. Hyde Dunn, who went to Australia. But the rest waited until they were appointed or given the charge by Shoghi Effendi. And so in 1937, when Shoghi Effendi gave the American believers the first 7-year plan, the divine plan began to be generally implemented. And that is, you had succession of teaching plans, which will be in perpetuity. So you have the plans of Shoghi Effendi, 7-year plan, 7-year plan, 10-year World Crusade. The Guardian passes, and then you have the House of Justice. And so you have the 9-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 7-year plan, a 6-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 4-year plan, a 12-month plan, a 4 5-year plans, which we have just completed, and we're now in a year of preparation for what will be a 9-year plan. So all of these are under the umbrella, as you can see in this really useful chart, the tablets of the divine plan, which began to be implemented here, and that is implemented in the sense of you have subsidiary plans under them. And so you have, you see all the plans here. All right, the twin institutions. The twin institutions, again, are the rulers and the learned. And Abdu'l-Bahá set out in detail the nature and role of the twin institutions that are his appointed successors and whose complementary functions ensure the unity of the Baha'i cause and the achievement of its mission throughout the dispensation, the guardianship and the universal house of justice. He laid particularly strong emphasis on the authority thus conveyed. The world order of Baha'u'lláh as the ultimate model for planetary governance. Now, this is something that's a whole nother talk, very interesting, but it's the sequence of events that the guardian, Shoghi Effendi, spells out in detail in the world order of Baha'u'lláh and other collections of his letters about how in time you will have first the lesser peace, which will be a secular arrangement, but in time you will have a convergence of the secular and the sacred. And so let me read this statement from the World Order of Baha'u'lláh by the Guardian. The emergence of a world community, the consciousness of world civilization, the founding of a world civilization and culture, all of which must synchronize with the initial stages in the unfoldment of the golden age of the Baha'i era, should by their very nature be regarded, as far as this planetary life is concerned, as the furthermost limits in the organization of human society. In other words, planetary governance is as described and borne out in the model of the Baha'i institution, is the model that is the most the furthermost framework you can get. And so it will be the model, if you will, even though it will be continually and continuously refined. And this is a chart showing, on the one hand, the institution of the learned, and here the institution of the rulers. And while we won't go into it because it's a lot of detail, you can see the relationship among them. Some of the lines are designating authority. Some are simply communication. So you have consultation and communication between the members of the continental boards and the national assemblies. You have consultation between the auxiliary boards and the regional councils, between the auxiliary boards and the regional teaching institutes, and the local assemblies, and so on. So we can discuss that in more detail if you wish. So that's the end. I'm sorry about the interference there in the middle. And I'm sorry if I had to hurry it up a little bit there at the end. At any rate, I think you get the idea of the strategic importance of all that Abdu'l-Bahá did in his incredible wisdom and insight, in effect, creating the final framework for how a planetary government should be created that is both of a sacred and a secular nature. It has both obligations, and the purview of the House or this institution, of this framework, is to create a unified global community. And my own thinking, I would suspect it's the same framework that would be applicable to any other planet where human life exists. All right.
For sharing with us, John, all of your wisdom and your accumulated knowledge. We really very much appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing you again. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today and wish you all the best.